Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by two guests. I'm going to be joined by Andre Storm, who is the Director of 3PL Sales at Passport, and also by Blake Dudek, who is the President and COO at Jay Group. We've had Blake on the show before, actually from his facility out there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So check out that episode if you haven't. But they're going to come on the show today to talk to us about international shipping. They're going to talk to us about some of the challenges traditionally that have been seen around international shipping from an e-commerce specific focus, and also why 3PLs typically might avoid a specialization or focus on international shipping, and how to maybe embrace that a little more to help brands be able to accomplish that and expand internationally by utilization of Passport and other methods as well. I think it's a very interesting and important subject to talk about, especially as we look at brands looking to expand their customer base and go to different countries. And we see that kind of overall, as a culture, in a sense, we're more connected globally through the internet and things of that nature. And now, how do we connect those products and things to that as well? So before we get started, Blake, why don't you kick us off a little bit? Tell us a little bit about Jay Group and what it is that you guys do.
Sure. So we are a third-party logistics business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, have facilities here and in Reno, Nevada. We are family-owned. It's been in the family now for over 65 years. My grandfather started it. Mother ran it for about 30 years. So she was a woman in the logistics space, which was not common in those days. I started running it about 7 years ago. Most of the brands that we support are digitally native brands. Many of those are expanding into retail as well. And about half to a third of those brands are also shipping internationally. Some of those brands were using FedEx, some DHL, and many are using Passport as well. I think that's probably as easy as I can state it. There's a lot more I'm sure we'll dive into during this podcast, but that's kind of the high level overview.
Definitely. We'll definitely dig in there. So, Andre, why don't you give us kind of just a brief high-level overview as well of Passport?
Yeah, for sure. So we are an international solutions provider. We really differentiate ourselves by keeping our logistics in-house, all of our compliance and technology, and just general expertise and guidance. And really what we're trying to do is just enable e-commerce brands and the 3PLs that support them for increasing their international volumes and increasing their international exposure, and really just giving them the confidence they need to make it a larger share of their business.
All right, great. And obviously both of you very involved in the international side of things and what's going on there. So I guess let's start from the perspective of, because, a company starts, we're based in the United States here. They start in the United States, for example, right? Their customer base, they grow kind of domestically, right? And then at some point, maybe there's some international interest from people that have learned about this brand, or maybe they're just looking for ways to expand their customer base potentially. But typically there's some challenges there, right? Because, doing business in one country versus another country isn't necessarily the same all the time, right? So I guess, Blake, why don't you kind of kick us off here a little bit, since you guys are working kind of directly with these brands on a daily basis through the 3PL. What are some of the challenges that these brands face when they're trying to go international for the first time?
Sure. And there's a number of them. So, from our experience, I think maybe we can start on the regulatory side. So depending on what you are selling, you may not be able to sell in certain countries, depending on what your, as an example, ingredient list might look like, or if there's banned substances or things like that. So that's one to consider. Packaging is another consideration. Language is another consideration, where you may have to actually print labels with the host country's primary language on it. You also obviously have to deal with taxes, tariffs, inbound costs, physical logistics to get it to that country. If you are shipping from the United States, which is what we're talking about today, you also have to deal with harm codes, country of origin, things like that. So when you start to consider all of the things that I just mentioned, depending on what you are selling, I mean, there are companies out there that have whole international teams that's only focus is making sure that they stay compliant with those regulatory requirements, language requirements, tax compliance. In some cases, you have to actually register as an entity in the actual country as well. So all of those things have to be considered as you are expanding to a new country. We're doing this for about, like I said, a third to half of the brands that we work with on very different scales. We have some brands that are doing several thousand packages a week internationally. We have other brands that are doing a couple a day. And there's really different requirements as you scale that business as well. Passport being a great solution for that brand who is looking to not just dip their toe in the water, but ship a substantial portion of their business. I think that Passport's a great option to scale with that. But we're also using folks like FedEx, UPS, and DHL, depending on country, weight class, regulations, things like that.
Very interesting. Yeah. It's interesting to hear kind of that range of international volume too, right? Where you said it's like a couple package, or maybe it's 1,000, right? In that sense, so a lot of different variations and I guess levels to where these people are in approaching the international market. So, Andre, anything you want to add to there? I mean, what does Passport kind of see as some of the challenges out there for brands?
Yeah, I mean, Blake hit on a lot of them, but I will say that in my experience, um, the challenges there's some perceived and there's some actual. I think a lot of them arise generally from a lack of confidence across a number of different layers. So the first layer, like Blake mentioned, could be the 3PL, right? If the 3PL doesn't exude a lot of confidence in an international program, their partner ecosystem, their capabilities, they won't effectively market that to their customers. And a lot of these customers put a lot of pride and look for strategic guidance from their 3PL. So if they're not everything related to the physical movement of those products, they're gonna trust them with it. And if they don't have a lot of confidence around their international capabilities, or if they're not actively putting international and the opportunity in front of their customers, they're not really going to want to spend a lot of time and energy and effort on it, right? Again, I've sat on that side of the fence, and when international came up, it was usually something like, yeah, we can do it, but I wouldn't really recommend it, or it's really complicated. I don't know if you really want to, but here's some rate cards. Here's how you can ship it. We can get it from A to B, but you know what you're getting into. So that's the first layer. The second layer is going to be the brand. A lot of times brands have tried shipping internationally, or they've turned it on for a little bit, but they don't really have the same kind of, again, confidence that they have shipping something domestically. What do they really want? What is like the end goal of this? It's like literally to just get to a customer's door. We're so used to it here in the US because it just gets dropped off. You have, USPS and Amazon and all these types of things that just kind of drop it off. They want to duplicate that, but they feel like it's a little bit too complicated and maybe not worth it. So, they don't really have that confidence. So they don't market and invest. And then the third level, which we'll get into in a little bit here, is the customer. The end customer needs to also have confidence that it's going to get to them effectively. They also want the confidence that like this brand understands, things that I'm used to as an international customer. And so certain things like making sure like things get delivered on time, making sure that there's certain duties and taxes are up front, and they don't have they have confidence that it's just going to get there. If those three layers are not really met, then brands don't invest heavily. And we'll get into it, but I think a lot of brands are more opportunistic. Like they turn it on, but they don't really push the same way that they would domestically on just like increasing their acquisition costs or things like that. So yeah, I think it's general lack of confidence that makes them not feel like international could be a large percentage of their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a lot of the points you made there, obviously the 3PL is very heavily involved there, right? I mean, the first point, obviously you're saying that the 3PL is maybe discouraging them a little bit in some cases, right? Saying like, oh, it's complicated, and they don't really want to specialize in that. But on the other side too, you're talking about, how is that service level going to be for the customer that's in a different country? That's a lot of times dependent on the 3PL as well, right? To be able to deliver on time and get those orders out when they want to. And I think from a brand perspective, obviously that's very important, right? All of a sudden now we're going to start selling in a different country. Well, we want to make a good impression there, right, to get some traction going. So I think that's
Mhm.
very important. So I'm curious, Blake, from your perspective as a 3PL, I mean, why do you think some 3PLs are kind of maybe not focused on international, or trying to avoid it in a way, or not really bringing it into the conversation with the brand, as Andre said?
Again, I think I'm going to go back to something that Andre said, which is expertise and trust,
Mm,
right? So I think there's a lot of folks out there who maybe years and years ago, before we had more technology and visibility around international, they were using a traditional UPS type account and shipping internationally. And somewhere along the way, the international paperwork fell off the side of that package. And all of a sudden, the 3PL is now getting
mm,
calls from UPS saying, I need this paperwork and I need more information to get this package through customs. And we still get some of those calls for some of the brands that we work with. That still happens on maybe not a weekly basis, but occasionally where something like that
mm,
happens when shipping with UPS or DHL. But as technology has evolved, as visibility to the entire supply chain and the package chain of custody in some cases has evolved, a lot of that visibility has become a lot more clear. And so while some 3PLs, and right now we use Manhattan Associates within the warehouse,
mm,
great system, but when doing it something internationally, there's also a pretty severe cost of implementation for new carriers with a system like that. And
Mhm.
so, if the 3PL hasn't continued to invest in updating their systems and implementing APIs and new webhooks and calls to implement some of these new services, you're using in some cases some pretty archaic type technology to send these packages. There's
Mhm.
better solutions out there depending on your volume. So I would say that's one piece. But back to what Andre said, it's also a trust issue.
mm,
A lot of 3PLs do not have, and we currently, I will say, do not have someone solely dedicated to international shipping.
mm,
That was something that when you get into the larger bands of 3PLs, like an Ingram Micro, a Siva, an XPO, they have teams of people who are dedicated to
Mhm.
international shipping and compliance. We have not done that because our volumes right now do not justify that. But part of the reason we've been able to get away with that is we have great partners in Passport, in DHL, in FedEx, who continually keep us updated on the changes that are upcoming, the regulatory requirements, the requirements around new pieces of information and data that need to be passed within the API or
mm.
the EDI files that we're passing them. So it's staying up to date, I think, is one of the other big challenges that a lot of the 3PL market has with international shipping.
Mm. Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Great insights there. And I think that makes a lot of sense too, right? I mean, it sounds like, it can be potentially kind of resource heavy in a sense, right? That you need to kind of make that investment in creating that expertise within your organization to be able to service that. So I could see how, for companies, 3PLs that haven't done that, or made that investment, would want to be a little avoidant there in a sense, right? And try to avoid that a little bit. So are you seeing from the brands that you work with, Blake, I mean, are you seeing that there is like an increased desire or to expand internationally? I mean, what's the climate around brands right now, and what's kind of, if there is, I mean, what's kind of like pushing them in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have several brands. One brand, as an example, we're about to launch a much bigger effort in 2025 with them. And part of the driver there was, and almost any brand can go do this. They can go look at their website traffic and look at where traffic's coming from. And this particular brand noticed a very large percentage of traffic coming from Canada. Being
Mm,
in Pennsylvania, the 80% of the Canadian population is within probably about 8 to 10 hours of us driving from right where I'm sitting. So this brand came to us and said, "Hey, we really want to launch into Canada. How do we do that?" And it was a very easy conversation to talk to them about the required pieces of information that we need to load into the rate cards. But I think one of the things that brands also have to think about is the actual customer experience. And Andre alluded to this earlier, but most of the brands that we support are fairly high touch. They want a very high level of customer
mm,
experience. And When I came into this industry 12 years ago, I remember doing some international shipping back then and was hearing stories about customers who, got a letter from the post office that said you have to come down to the post office and pay $150 for duties and taxes. And the customer calls the brand and says, "What do you mean? Like, why do I have to pay $150 on a $200 item?" Well, they hadn't factored in duties and taxes. And some of this new technology that's come out, I think really helps not just the brand experience through checkout, which I'm sure Andre will talk about, but it's also the brand experience to the customer in the delivery experience, the convenience of it, and the actual known costs. I think that's one of the areas where Passport has separated itself from even the DHLs and FedExes is guaranteeing a service and an end delivered cost to a consumer. It gives the brand, the 3PL, and the consumer a lot of confidence in exactly what's going to happen with that parcel once it leaves, the warehouse in the U.S. So I think that's one of the areas where we've had a lot of confidence in working with Passport, introducing them to brands because we've seen it work for the last several years. We've been partners.
Yeah, I think to build on that, one thing that I've seen with a lot of e-commerce businesses is not necessarily they've tapped out the U.S. market, but it's obviously a competitive kind of space. If you look at an industry like apparel or beauty or these types of things where there's been a lot of entrants over the years. I'm talking like even, let's say even pre-COVID of, very heavily funded, venture funded organizations that can essentially just increase their marketing costs and then steal all the customers, right? And so it becomes increasingly competitive. And I think a lot of the brands, at least that, that think somewhat outside the box, they say, hey, look, like we're not competing or our business is down in the US. What can we do outside of just increasing our marketing spend, which is going to make all of the lifetime values of our customers hard to get in the green, right? And so they start looking into other markets and they start looking into other ways that they can, increase their business. And the data we have shows that customer acquisition costs, it varies by market, but generally speaking, they're substantially lower than in the US if you can try to duplicate as much as you can the experience. So as close you can get to a domestic experience for Canadian customers, UK customers, Australia customers, the more you can run your playbook that has worked well here. There's not a lot of these markets are very mature in their e-commerce maturation. A lot of them are English speaking. If you look at Canada, UK, Australia, the three largest international markets. And so there's not as much as people think that you need to do to make the experience a good one for them, right? And so it just makes it a lot easier for people to kind of stop thinking of like, how do I get like 2% better domestically? It's more so like, what are the markets can we look into that could affect our business?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point too about the, kind of the competitive landscape in a sense. And, I saw on your website, additionally, I mean, it says that, typically on average, like brands from their revenue, right, it's like our average 3% is coming from international, but when switching to the Passport or utilizing Passport, like, you're seeing an increase up to like 10% of revenue coming from international. So obviously that kind of shows a little bit of that opportunity, right? If a brand wants to go international. So I guess tell us a little bit about, kind of what does that step look like? I mean, Blake, you mentioned in there kind of that surprise, that $150 surprise there, that the customer and the brand, I guess, sounds like too, was not really prepared for or ready or didn't factor in. So I guess maybe Andre, tell us a little bit about, kind of the steps that a brand or a 3PL working with a brand should start to take to help to be like, okay, yeah, we can start to push further into international.
That's a great question. I would say it's interesting too, because that metric of around 3%, I would say that the reason why it's low is you said a word there that stuck out to me, but the opportunity. I think a lot of brands are very opportunistic versus I'll call it intentional, meaning a lot of brands that we see when they think about international, they turn it on and they just leave it on because naturally while they don't usually market heavily into these markets and into these international markets, a lot of times they do have, I'll call them fans, right? And they have fans because they invest and they work really hard for getting their Instagram and their Facebook to a good point where they have, a lot of followers, a lot of backing. They also invest for marketing through those platforms, and those are all global platforms, right? They're not locked to a specific market, and so a lot of times, especially like a lot of brands, like their Instagrams and Facebooks might be a little bit more like lifestyle and community driven. Of course they are selling products, but when people buy into that community that they want to be a part of, they eventually want to order some products. So a lot of I've talked to so many customers that were domestic only, and when you kind of learn a little bit about their intentions around international, it's more like I want to stop telling people we don't ship these places versus like I want to make this a very substantial part of my business. So it's kind of opportunistic versus intentional. So I think the number is low because a lot of people today, again, through the maturation of a lot of technologies and different types of services in the market, they have it on, but they don't do much beyond that. And so to get to that 10%, 20%, we have some customers that really do 40+% of their business internationally. To get to that intentional area, I think you really have to, gain some expertise. Again, that could be through the 3PL. That could be, some people go out and, there's consultants and these types of things that they can hire that have a lot of experience. I'm biased, but I think, talking to Passport is the easiest and most straightforward way to get to that point because this is essentially all that we do. But I think just really just like reaching out, giving themselves the confidence that this is worth their time and that, it can be a substantial part of their business. But that really comes with a high degree of intentionality that when brands do give it the time, they see a substantial impact to their business. 10-20% is very common for most of our customers.
Interesting. So I mean, I guess tell us, because you are biased in a sense, right? You're from Passport, as you mentioned there. But yeah, I mean, tell us, I guess, like, where does Passport come into that process, right? So I'm a brand, I'm working with a 3PL, I'm thinking about, going more into international or just starting in international in general. Where does Passport kind of come into that process, and how do you guys kind of make it easier for them to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of our largest strategies as an organization is to really partner and be a right-hand man to the 3PL. So today we work with around 120 3PLs in the ecosystem, obviously Jay Group being one of them. And we really try to strategize and train and be a resource for the 3PLs because they have what I would call like a very intimate relationship with their customers. They house their products. There's millions of dollars worth of assets that they're trusting the 3PL on. And so one of our biggest goals, irrespective of if you ship with Passport or any other carrier, is to keep instilling that confidence into the 3PL. So when a brand does ask, hey, how do I ship internationally? Again, even if they don't ship with us, the 3PL has a little bit more guidance on like how to give that to the customer. So what we really want to do is see just like a general increase and adoption to international shipping as a whole. We want to be one piece of a bigger puzzle that I think would help, just like general e-commerce as an industry, which I think is Kevin, you probably know better than me, right? I think it's somewhere around $1 trillion. It's getting its way up to like the 5-6 trillion, I think, by 2030, if the latest data that I saw. Yeah. And so we want to be a large share of that. And so like how exactly they go about it, I mean, we have obviously like very intensive discovery processes and areas that we understand brands' past experience around international, what their future goals are, what an increase of 5 to 10% of their general revenues would mean to them as an organization, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the biggest challenges for us is everybody knows FedEx, everybody knows DHL, everybody knows UPS. Not enough people know about services like Passport. There's a number of players in the space. There's Global E, or if you heard of some of these other larger ones that have also been trying to enable international at a higher scale, similar to us. So I think the biggest thing is like general awareness to the market that there are partners that can help them with it. Is where we really try to sit. And so without getting too much into just like general passport process, I think it's really just like general awareness that there are people out there that do focus on this, and it is a real opportunity is really the goal for our realm.
Interesting. And so, Blake, I guess, you guys utilize Passport. So tell us a little bit about, kind of how it makes it easier for you from the operations perspective, but then also allows you to provide additional value to your clients at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure. So from an operational perspective, there's a few big pieces. So, Andre mentioned one of, a few of the competitors that are out in the space. And we've worked with some in the past. One of the benefits for Passport, and this may have to do with some of the volume that we do, and Andre may have to comment on that. But one of the big benefits that we saw is rather than having to package, as an example, 25 international packages going to Canada into then a FedEx box, identify which 25 packages are in a FedEx box, label that FedEx box, and send it to somewhere in New Jersey or New York or anything like that, and then have it, have to stop in New York, spend a day or two unpacking. That other partner then relabels it, and then it goes on a truck to Canada. Passport has a daily pickup with us, which means we don't have to create additional labels and additional time in transit delays and things like that. So that was one operational benefit. The other, obviously, is their API. They have a very easy to use API for us from a label generation and communication. So we were very easily able to integrate with them. So those are two of the big operational benefits, I think. And we flow that process directly alongside our domestic shipments because of how the API works and the label generation works. So we don't have to have a completely separate process to pick international and domestic, which is great. From a customer standpoint, again, I think where I have seen Passport set themselves apart is on the partnership side. When a brand comes to us and they say, hey, we want to ship internationally, we talk about what their goals are. How much volume do you want to send? What type of packages, things like that. And while we could go put them on UPS or FedEx or DHL, those parties, while they're willing to partner to a degree, we've seen a different level of partnership with Passport. And in speaking directly to that, they're able to actually help you with language changes in your website to appeal to a different market, making sure your price structures are proper for that market that you're entering, having the ability to actually include duties, taxes, or transportation charges in the base price of the actual item that you're shipping. I have not seen the other carriers partner at that level with the individual brand, where I have seen that out of Passport. So when the average brand comes to us, we're suggesting Passport first because they are the one that's going to partner with them and actually get them over the hump of that trust, communication, visibility, and supply chain and get them into that country successfully rather than the launch it and pray. And so that's kind of where we've seen Passport differentiate themselves.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, going back to what you said earlier around, having that expertise. I mean, in the first place, like a brand goes to a 3PL in the first place because they want someone that has that fulfillment and distribution expertise to help them take that over, right? And then, as they continue to expand, then it makes sense to, get somebody like a Passport to help you do that international expansion as well and make that easier so they can focus on, what their core is, right, is sales and marketing, right? Move that product and then, get that infrastructure and that physical movement of the product to the customer and that customer experience to be handled by the experts that are out there. So I think that's really, really great that you guys are able to do that and kind of make that a little more seamless, not only from the operational perspective, as Blake highlighted there, but also then from the brand perspective, and ultimately that customer experience at the end of the day, delivering and making that impact into whatever market they're trying to enter and get into. So I think that's a really great thing there. So really appreciate you both kind of coming in here, talking to us about some of these challenges around international, and how to go about it, and how to leverage a tool like Passport, right, to be able to do that as well. So I want to wrap up here. I want to get from both of you. I want to kind of hear what would be your like top tip for a brand that's thinking about international expansion in some way. So Andre, you want to give us your top tip, one tip, your top tip for a brand that's thinking about this.
Oh man, yeah, sure. I mean, I think if they're not shipping, if they're only shipping domestically,
Mm,
a top tip, irrespective of some of the ways to be intentional, what I mentioned earlier, just turn on Canada, UK, Australia.
mm,
They're English speaking. There's not too much different. That's one piece, or one tip, I guess you could say, for a domestic. Now, if you have it on, I would say just like again, it's broad, but just be intentional about one market. And if I had to pick one, just be intentional about Canada.
mm,
There's not too much nuance. They're very used to buying from U.S. based companies. Um, and like the process for collection of duties and taxes is relatively streamlined through something like Shopify today. But just be intentional in it. Like try to offer free shipping for a month, and just
mm.
just try it out, right? See how it works and see how it's received, and go to Canada, do some shopping there, see what people are into, like just I think expand a little bit there. But if I had to give one tip, is talk to Passport.
Oh, I felt that was coming. I felt that was coming there.
Yeah, so I think that's what I would say.
All right, cool. And Blake, what about you? You have a tip for people?
I'd say focus on the customer experience.
Mm,
And the reason I say that is we hear it from brands all the time, right? It's the brand went into a country without a big focus. They launched without a attention to detail on what the actual customer's experience is going to be. And
mm,
then just a few orders that you ship because you weren't, I'm going to use the word Andre uses, because you weren't intentional about what you were doing with customer experience, all of a sudden
Mhm,
that drives hours of work from a customer
mm,
service standpoint, from your operations
mhm,
manager to make sure things, are going well and things like that. Like if you spend just a few extra minutes up front focusing on what the customer is going to experience throughout the journey from the checkout in your shopping cart all the way through delivery, it's going to save you a ton of time dealing with your 3PL, dealing with your carrier and your provider, and
mhm.
certainly saving your customer service team a lot of time as well. Um,
mm.
that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's a great one because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, I mean, we're doing all these things in the supply chain that we do to deliver to the customer at the end of the day, right? And if you start to go into a new market, the last thing you want to do is have a bad customer experience to kick it off. So I think that's a great thing to focus on that detail, and great tip there. So great information from both of you here today, and great insights on the international shipping side of things for e-commerce brands here. So if people want to get in touch with J Group, Blake, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Obviously, our website is just pretty simple: www.jaygroup.com. There's forms on there you can fill out, or you're more than welcome to reach out to myself. And my email is pretty simple. It's just my first and last name, blake.dudek@jaygroup.com, and I can connect you with the sales team or the ops team or client services team or whoever you'd like to chat with.
All right, great. And Andre, how about you and Passport? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. Very similar. So passportshipping.com is our website. We have a number of forums and demo requests that you can do there. Feel free also to reach out direct to me, Andre at passportshipping.com. Also, if you are, a 3PL in the ecosystem, you can reach out to us at 3PL at passportshipping.com. And if you are a brand in the market, are potentially interested in Passport, if you're in a 3PL, I would say first reach out to your 3PL and ask if they work with us. If not, feel free to also come to our website and take a look. We can virtually integrate almost any 3PL in the ecosystem, and it's an area that we're continuing to invest in.
All right, awesome. And we'll definitely put all that information for J Group and Passport at thenewwarehouse.com and in the show notes as well. So thank you, Andre and Blake, for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, guys. Great to chat with you. Good to see you again, Kevin.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.